When Henry returned from his business trip abroad, he brought back a little girl, telling me she was his long-lost sister. The girl had a pure, lively, and cute appearance, and I really liked her. Later, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, Henry and the little girl were in the living room, kissing passionately. On Valentine's Day, it snowed heavily, and Henry stayed late at work. I went out alone to see the night view and ended up at a proposal scene. Through the crowd, I saw Henry proposing to the little girl. The snow fell harder, and I pulled my coat tighter, walking alone on the street. It was bustling around me, lovers walked past, their faces full of smiles. It was Valentine's Day, and Henry had said he'd be working late that evening. The plans I had made were ruined. I opened my mouth to say something, but then decided against it. When I looked up, Henry was already gone, and I felt foolish for feeling upset. I should have asked him in advance, but if he was working late, there was nothing I could do. I comforted myself, but deep down, I knew the truth. I had been with Henry for 8 years, and he didn't even remember our anniversary, let alone something as minor as Valentine's Day. He would never take leave to spend it with me. In the past, I'd get angry when he forgot our special days, sulking and giving him the cold shoulder. He was always slow to notice, and after a couple of days, he'd buy me gifts to make up for it. Even when he was apologizing, he never said sweet words. He was like a wooden doll, and I could never feel his emotions. But I liked that about him, his quiet way of showing affection, never speaking too much. So, we never fought, only I would sometimes sulk alone. Over time, I got used to it and didn't find the need to sulk anymore. We went to the same university, and back then, he had a crush on me. He secretly gave me breakfast for 6 months without ever showing his face. I thought to myself that this person must have a good personality. Later, I pretended to walk away, turned back, and caught this shy man who only dared to love me in secret. As I walked aimlessly, lost in thought, I suddenly felt drained. I turned to go home but was drawn to the noise of a crowd. At the flower shop, a proposal was happening. The man had reserved all the roses in the store to surprise the woman. I overheard some bystanders saying they were envious. How romantic. If only Henry would get the hint, I murmured softly, moving closer to the proposal scene. Under the flashing neon lights, I was briefly blinded and then saw a familiar figure. Amid the crowd, the tall man proposing, dressed in a thick down jacket, was staring lovingly at his partner. She wore the same pink down jacket, and they looked perfect together. Henry hated wearing down jackets, and the ones I bought for him were always thrown away. He would always wear shirts, suits, ties, and occasionally a trench coat or jacket. He once told me, "Down jackets are so tacky." Then he'd glance at my puffy down jacket and thick leggings and add, "Down jackets make you look bulky, like an old lady. Don't wear them anymore." I was upset at the time, but after that, I never wore down jackets again. It's really hard to be disliked by someone you love. The man proposing had a small red mole on his nose, which I noticed when the lights flickered. Henry also had a small red mole on his nose. I loved to caress it when we were close, running my finger over it. Eventually, Henry would get frustrated and pin my hands down to stop me. I looked at my own thin coat, khaki, classic, and versatile, chosen by Henry. He didn't like me wearing pink. My wardrobe was full of black, white, and khaki, with few pastel colors. In his words, "Pink is too delicate." "How old are you now?" He said this when he overheard me watching a drama, and I didn't expect he'd later use it on me. I looked back at the crowd and tears fell. Henry, wearing the pink down jacket he hated, was proposing to another woman. We'd been together for 8 years, and every day after graduation, I'd been hoping he would propose to me. I knew his shy nature, so I gave him 8 years to realize it. But it seemed those 8 years meant nothing. Henry seemed to be leaving me. "Emily, marry me, please?" Henry knelt down with a red velvet ring box. Inside was a dazzling diamond ring. It was the exact one I had often touched in the jewelry store, the unique piece I had asked the owner to reserve for me, waiting for my husband to buy it for me. I didn't lack money and could have bought it for myself, but I wanted Henry to give it to me, to propose with it. A few days ago, the store owner told me the ring would no longer be available because someone had insisted on buying it. I was upset for days, then chose another ring. This time, I didn't want to wait anymore. I planned to tell Henry how I felt about marriage when he had time, buy the ring, and get our marriage certificate. But now, it seemed like I would never get that day. Henry and the girl he proposed to were embracing in the crowd, kissing. I watched them from afar, and it felt like everything was no longer relevant to me. I turned to leave, just as the little girl popped her head out of Henry's embrace, playful and lively. When I saw her face, it struck me she was Emily. But wasn't she supposed to be Henry's sister? Henry lied to me, she wasn't his sister at all. All that talk about a long-lost sister was just an excuse to deceive me. In a daze, I pushed my way through the crowd and left. By the time the tears fell, my eyelashes had already frozen. That thin khaki-colored coat? I tossed it in the trash as soon as I entered the house. I didn't need it, and Amara didn't need the coat or Henry. My heart ached, my head throbbed, and my thoughts were a jumbled mess. My mind was a blur, and I began packing my bags. This house was rented by Henry, and later, we pooled our savings and bought it. I looked around at the surroundings. The sweet memories that once filled this place now felt like knives in my heart, making me nauseous. I had to force myself to keep packing, but halfway through, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I collapsed in front of the sink, vomiting uncontrollably. My stomach was emptied out, and all that came up were liquids. Finally, I slumped to the floor. I didn't know how much time had passed, but when I finally stood up and glanced at the clock, it was already 1 a.m. It seemed Henry had made up his mind to spend the night with Emily. After such a romantic proposal on Valentine's Day, of course, they'd stay in a hotel. Dragging my suitcase, I didn't look back. I left the home where Henry and I had lived for 8 years. When I arrived at the hotel, I collapsed on the bed, feeling an overwhelming sense of discomfort. My whole body was screaming in pain. Despite the hotel's heating, I was drenched in cold sweat. In a daze, I lost consciousness and fell into a deep sleep. I didn't wake up until a hotel staff member came to remind me to check out. I struggled to sit up, but the moment I tried, I collapsed back onto the bed. The staff member was alarmed, shouting at me to stop pretending. I gasped for breath, weakly saying, "I'm not faking. Can you call an ambulance? I don't feel well." Before I could finish, I passed out again, and I didn't even know when the ambulance arrived. When I woke up again, I saw a pristine white ceiling and smelled the strong scent of disinfectant. I looked down, and there was an 4 needle in my hand. "You're finally awake. The medical fees and ambulance costs you need to pay me now." It was the hotel staff. I weakly reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and transferred 3,000 yuan to her. She thanked me and left, and the room was empty again. I didn't know what to do, so I just let my mind go blank, lying there, staring off into space. My phone had been off, but when I made the transfer, I turned it on. Now, I could hear the constant pinging of incoming messages. I ignored it at first, but after a while, the noise was too much to ignore. I turned the phone to silent. On the screen, there were so many red dots, dozens of missed calls and messages from Henry. I opened the conversation and started reading. The last message from Henry read, "Luna, let's break up." I didn't reply. I closed my phone again. From a heart full of love to complete indifference, it didn't seem to take long. I lay in the hospital bed, mocking my own foolishness. I had been deceived by the person I trusted most. Henry's so-called sister had moved into our home under the guise of family, and I had been cooking and cleaning for them every day. I blinked, and a cold tear slid down my cheek. Suddenly, something came to my mind. 3 months ago, Henry was about to leave for a business trip overseas. Before he left, I packed his bags carefully, making sure everything he might need was ready and nothing was overstuffed. 7 days passed, and his return date had already passed, but he showed no signs of coming back. His phone was off, and the texts I sent went unanswered. Just as I was about to report him missing, he called. His voice sounded hoarse, his breath uneven, and he spoke quickly. I thought I heard a woman's laughter in the background, but before I could ask, Henry abruptly hung up. I was filled with confusion, but I couldn't ignore my worry for him. I feared something had happened to him overseas, so he'd been unreachable for so long. But now that he had finally returned, I figured whatever had happened could be dealt with later. Little did I know, my trust and love had become the perfect tools for Henry's deception. When I drove to the airport to pick him up, I saw him alone, carrying 2 suitcases. One was the silver gray suitcase I bought for him, and the other was rose gold. Behind him was a young girl, pure-looking but dressed in a sexy, provocative outfit, hopping and skipping alongside him. She carried a small, delicate handbag and chewed gum, looking carefree and full of energy. She leaned toward Henry now and then, blowing bubbles, and when they popped, both of them laughed casually, relaxed. I stood there, watching them, feeling something strange stir in me. It had been years since I'd seen Henry's face look so carefree, so light. Then, he noticed me. Smiling, he stopped the girl from messing around. The girl protested but quickly quieted down, standing obediently as she looked at me, her eyes full of curiosity. I didn't miss the look of awe in her eyes, and a part of my unease eased. For years, aside from working and occasionally doing household chores, I had devoted most of my time to skincare. I don't wear makeup, so skincare was essential. Even without makeup, my skin now looked as youthful as a young college girl's. Although I was nearing 30, I looked like I hadn't aged a day. "Luna, you're here." Henry called my name from a distance, and his eyes still held the tenderness they always had. I sighed in relief, the weight on my chest lifting. I walked up to them with a smile. "Henry, who's this?" My gaze landed on the girl, but I didn't notice the hesitation and guilt written on Henry's face, nor the nervousness he tried to hide. She's my sister Emily. I met her by chance abroad and brought her back," Henry stammered, his words awkward and unsure, as though he was trying to figure out how to explain. I thought back to what Henry had told me before, that he had a sister who was kidnapped when she was very young. I nodded and looked at the girl again. Her look was the epitome of classic American sweetheart style, pure and cute on the outside, but dressed in a fiery, sexy outfit. Maybe this is what people on the internet mean when they say someone is both innocent and seductive. I couldn't help but sigh to myself, youth really is such a blessing. For a moment, Emily's expression froze, looking awkward and unnatural. But the next second, she flashed a smile that was as bright and warm as summer sunshine. "Luna sis, can I call you that? Calling you sister-in-law feels like I'm making you sound old," she said with a sweet, teasing tone. "You look so pretty, Luna sis. I bet you and Henry have a great relationship. When he was abroad, he always talked about you." As she spoke, her golden hair swayed in the light, while Henry stood by her side, his lips curling up into a faint smile. His expression was soft. I smiled in return. This little girl really knew how to flatter people. Her words were so sweet, I couldn't help but like her. On the way home, Henry was driving, and Emily and I sat in the back seat. The atmosphere was light and lively thanks to Emily's energy. But I couldn't help but notice that Henry kept staring at the rearview mirror at every red light. When I spoke to him, he didn't respond right away, his eyes flickering with an unreadable expression. I had the strange feeling that he was looking at something through the rearview mirror, but it wasn't me. I instinctively turned to glance at Emily. She had her chin resting on her hand, looking out of the window, not meeting Henry's gaze in the mirror. I felt guilty for being paranoid. Emily was Henry's sister. How could I be having these dirty thoughts about them? But, as it turns out, I wasn't being paranoid at all. Henry and Emily were putting on quite a show, performing for me. They deserved awards for their acting skills. After we got back from the airport, I personally prepared a guest room for Emily. As I entered the living room, I overheard Henry and Emily talking softly. Emily's face didn't look too good. As soon as I walked over, they fell silent. Emily came up to me and wrapped her arm around mine, sweetly pouting. "Luna sis, thanks for tidying up the room for me. What's for dinner? What should we do for food?" Before I could answer, Henry suddenly interrupted, his voice low and seemingly displeased. "We'll eat out tonight. I've already made a reservation at a restaurant. Just as I was about to agree, Emily and Henry started contradicting each other. No, I don't want to eat out. Emily pouted, looking defiant as she stared at Henry. Henry's tone was cold. If you don't behave, then get out of my house and go back abroad. At that moment, I was confused. Why were they fighting like this, ruining the sibling bond they had? My heart ached for them. I tried to smooth things over. Henry, you're grown up now. How can you still argue with your sister like that? Well, how about this? I said, trying to make peace. I'll cook tonight. I'll make dinner for you both. I spent 2 hours cooking a big meal, colorful, fragrant, and delicious. After I finished setting the last dish on the table, I went to the living room to call them to wash up. But as I approached, I heard something odd. It sounded like faint gasps and moans. I tried to listen carefully, but the sound faded. I shook my head, realizing I must have been exhausted after 2 hours of cooking and was probably starting to hallucinate. Henry, Emily, come wash up and eat. As I stepped into the living room, I saw Emily and Henry sitting on the couch. Henry's ears were slightly red, and his face was filled with irritation. Emily was leisurely touching up her lipstick in a compact mirror, her lipstick smudged all over the corners of her lips. I was puzzled. Henry, why is your face so red? Did you have another argument with Emily? Henry, you need to be more generous. She's your sister, didn't chase her away just after finding her, I said, trying to lighten the mood. I even went to our bedroom and grabbed a brand new lipstick I hadn't opened yet, offering it to Emily. Emily, try this one. It'll go perfectly with your makeup today. When I returned to the living room, Henry was already gone, and only Emily remained, still touching up her makeup. I smiled and handed her the lipstick. Emily looked a little surprised but then smiled sweetly as she accepted it, saying, "Thank you, Luna sis. You're so kind." Now, I realized that smile on Emily's face wasn't one of gratitude at all. It was a sly, meaningful smile. She was mocking me for being such a fool. Emily was a femme fatale, sweet in appearance but poisonous in heart. Henry was a piece of rotten wood, appearing stiff and unyielding on the outside, but already decayed to the core inside. He didn't resist Emily's deliberate seduction, he didn't pull away. He was with me, yet he enjoyed Emily's advances. Because I was too naive, I failed to recognize the danger of her venomous charm in time. I handed Henry over to her, without even realizing it. And that's how they had the chance to kiss passionately in the living room while I was busy in the kitchen. Their kiss was so intense and desperate that it left her lipstick smeared all over her lips. The memory made me feel nauseous again. When the 4-drip ran out, I left the hospital and went to another hotel with the medicine the doctor had prescribed. I took the medicine and slept the whole day away. The next morning, I woke up feeling revitalized, ready to live again. After all, I had only encountered a piece of rotten wood, not something worth doing anything drastic over, and certainly not something worth harming myself for. I thought I would be devastated, but it turned out to just be emotional pain. My mind was still clear, even if my heart ached. I found a new place to live in an elegantly renovated 2-story loft. Everything here was in warm tones. Just looking around, I felt comforted and at peace. When Henry and I bought our house, I had suggested we go with warm tones for the decor, but he had refused. He said warm colors made the space too soft, and in such an environment, people would become lazy and unmotivated. He didn't like that kind of person and didn't want to become one himself. So, I gave up on my idea, only keeping the warm-toned tatami mats, while the rest of the house was decorated in cold, impersonal black, white, and gray tones. Now, I often lie on the tatami mats during my free time, reading, and it feels like my soul is being healed. But the cold colors of black, white, and gray, after a while, they become unbearable. Just like Henry, and after 8 years, he must have grown tired of me. I heard that women's feelings grow deeper over time, while men's feelings start intense but gradually fade away. That's probably how Henry and I ended up in this situation. I spent a few days moping around in my new place, letting my mind wander and indulge in all kinds of thoughts. I took 2 weeks off from work, and when the vacation ended, I regained my composure and left behind the bitter, whiny version of myself. I threw all my energy back into work. At the same time, I started discussing the division of assets with Henry. We hadn't gotten married, but our assets, including the house and car, were deeply entangled. Even after our breakup, they remained closely connected. Henry and I discussed the division of property in a matter-of-fact way, without much emotion. Most of the time, I was doing the talking, and he just responded with a casual "HM." He probably knew he'd done me wrong and didn't oppose me taking a larger share of the money. As we neared the day of finalizing the asset division, I suddenly received a message from him late at night. "Luna, are you tired of this? We've broken up, but you're still clinging on. Can you have some dignity? I'm about to get married, so what are you still hanging around for?" I had been fast asleep when the message notification woke me up, leaving me dazed. I glanced at my phone and couldn't help but feel speechless. Although the message didn't specify who sent it, I could tell right away that it was Emily using Henry's phone. Henry might not be a great person, but he wasn't the type to randomly lash out at people without reason. I thought for a moment and then replied to her, "If you want Henry, then go ahead and keep him. I'm not interested in fighting you for him. That kind of trash, I've lost all interest in." Then, I deleted and blocked all contact information between Henry and Emily. No more chances for them to disgust me. At this point, most of the assets had already been divided. The remaining bit, I just considered it my gift to Henry. Congratulations for marrying someone as despicable as him. There aren't many people as low as them in this world, so it's perfect that they ended up together. Seeing that, I thought Emily was probably fuming behind the screen, wanting to curse me out but realizing I'd blocked her. I looked at the bank balance, which had increased by several times, and felt quite satisfied. I happily went back to bed, thinking that as long as they were upset, I would be happy. But I didn't expect the next day, Emily would directly arrange a meeting with me. She found my company and secretly snapped photos of me, sending them as a threat for me to meet her. While I wasn't afraid of her, I didn't want to deal with unnecessary trouble. So, I went to the cafe she mentioned. She handed me a card and said, "There's 1 million on this card. It's compensation for you leaving Henry. Don't ever show up in front of us again." I was stunned for a moment, but I couldn't help but feel happy inside. This was a good deal for me. I gladly accepted the card and agreed to everything she said. I almost felt thankful to her. She had just given me free money and helped me eliminate some of the trash in my life. At least I had only wasted 8 years. I hadn't married Henry, so if he revealed his true colors later, it would be much worse. As for them, I didn't really want revenge. It was just another cliché story of a scumbag and a nasty woman entangled with each other. I had seen this scenario too many times before, and though this was my first personal experience with it, in the end, it wasn't so devastating as I had imagined. Crying and heartache were instinctive reactions. But turning around and walking away without hesitation was my choice. It wasn't worth letting someone unworthy affect my life. The more time and energy I spent on them, the more I'd get trapped in past pain, unable to escape. I didn't want to become someone who couldn't think clearly, someone who wallowed in self-pity and ended up a completely different person. That was the one thing I couldn't accept. I quickly put Henry and Emily behind me and focused all my energy on my work and life. One morning, a colleague mysteriously pulled me aside at my desk and whispered, "Luna, have you heard? We're getting 2 interns today. Both are total heartthrobs." I looked up, about to reply that I didn't know, when I saw 2 men walking toward the office area. The first one was a familiar face, Henry. I rolled my eyes as soon as I saw him, muttering, "What bad luck." The next moment, my eyes landed on the man behind Henry, and I blinked in surprise. "Ethan? What are you doing back here?" Ethan had been casually observing his surroundings, but when he heard me, he glanced over at me with a clear look in his eyes. As soon as he saw me, he pushed Henry aside, causing him to stumble. Then, Ethan walked straight toward me, naturally taking my hand and kissing the back of it. With a playful grin, He spoke in a thick northeastern accent. "Luna, what are you doing here? It's been what, 6 or 7 years since we've seen each other?" I raised my hand and gave him a playful tap on the head, correcting him. "It's been 8 years. I wiped the back of my hand where he had kissed it with a wet wipe, joking, "We're in China now. You don't need to slobber all over my hand, you know." Ethan, who was rubbing his head from the playful hit, just grinned from ear to ear. We were catching up enthusiastically when, unfortunately, someone else came over to interrupt. Henry walked up to apologize. "Luna, I'm really sorry. I didn't know Emily had been rude to you and deleted your contact." I was speechless. My eyes almost rolled to the back of my head. Ethan, seeing this, asked with a knowing look, "You two, did you break up?" Maybe it was just my impression, but I thought I heard a hint of amusement in Ethan's voice. "We broke up a long time ago," I said, not mincing words. At the same time, Henry and I both said, "We didn't break up." I turned to look at Henry in disbelief, the first time I realized how thick-skinned he truly was. I shot him a disdainful glance and then pulled Ethan a couple of steps away. I turned to Ethan and said, "I broke up with him. He cheated on me and even proposed to the other woman." Ethan visibly fumed with anger, gritting his teeth. "He dares to bully you? I'll go take care of him." I laughed. It felt so good to see an old friend again. All the frustration I'd accumulated in recent days seemed to vanish in an instant. I quickly grabbed Ethan, who was about to roll up his sleeves to deal with Henry, and started asking him about his recent life and future plans. Ethan just gave me a meaningful smile and said, "You'll find out soon enough." Then, Ethan and Henry left the office area with the assistant and headed to the CEO's office. During our regular morning meeting, as the leader was talking, he suddenly stopped and said, "Let's welcome Ethan to our company." "What? Ethan?" A colleague sitting next to me kept gossiping about Ethan, and that's when I learned that the company I worked for was actually owned by Ethan's family. He had come back to China to take over the family business. What a guy. He had been keeping such a low profile. I always knew Ethan's family was wealthy, that he was a rich second generation, but today was the first time I realized just how wealthy he really was. I secretly sent Ethan a message on WeChat, "Good brother, don't forget the ones who stood by you when you got rich." Ethan responded with a smug emoji but kept a calm expression on the outside. After Ethan's introduction, it was Henry's turn. Henry was good-looking with an outstanding presence. His self-introduction was almost as popular as Ethan's. But I couldn't be bothered to look at him and continued chatting with Ethan secretly on WeChat. Suddenly, a colleague next to me nudged me, and I realized the meeting room had gone quiet. Everyone was looking in my direction. I heard Henry, who was standing at the front of the room, repeat what he had just said. "I joined this company for 2 reasons. First, to work hard and excel at this job. Second, to win back my girlfriend, Luna." What? This was so out of nowhere. I thought, what the heck, are you crazy? It turns out, when you get so speechless and frustrated, you actually get angry to the point of laughing. I immediately stood up from my chair and sneered, "Henry, you really have no shame. You're the one who cheated and the one who broke up with me first. Who gave you the confidence to say that you want to win me back? Let me make it clear now, you can forget about it. I will never even look at you again." It seemed that Henry didn't expect me to call him out like this in the meeting room. He stammered and tried to explain, "Luna, it wasn't me, it was Emily, she." I didn't want to hear a single word of it. I couldn't take it anymore and yelled, "Shut the hell up." The room immediately filled with shocked gasps. I suddenly realized how out of line I had been. I had never raised my voice at the office, let alone yelled like this. I quickly apologized, saying, "Sorry, I lost my composure," and rushed out of the meeting room. Once I reached the underground parking lot, I leaned against my car and covered my face, tears falling. After a while, I heard footsteps approaching, and a soft tissue was shoved into my hand. "You're still the same as before, always crying," Ethan's voice came. I wiped my tears, then sniffling and embarrassed, I responded, "I don't cry. When have I ever cried?" Ethan opened his mouth to say something but stopped. He opened the car door and gestured for me to get in the passenger seat. Where are we going? I asked curiously. Ethan's eyes flickered, and he said softly, "You'll find out soon." I nodded, realizing that for the first time, Ethan was speaking in serious, proper Mandarin for this long. I couldn't help but laugh, which made Ethan glance at me often, his previously faint sadness completely gone. The car stopped outside the familiar university campus, but instead of heading into the campus, Ethan led me into a small alley near the entrance. We sat down in a tiny breakfast shop crowded with people. Ethan ordered with practiced ease. The shop was small but very clean, and the elderly man running the place had a kind expression. As he served our food, the old man looked at Ethan for a while, then his eyes lit up. "It's you, young man." He turned to me and said, "You're the little girlfriend who used to love eating preserved egg and lean pork congee, right? He chased you for so long, and he actually won you over. I, the old man, am part of a true love story." With that, the old man slowly turned and walked away, his face full of satisfaction. I was left speechless, confused. I looked at Ethan, but he was too busy eating congee, his head lowered and silent. I stared at the steaming bowl of preserved egg and lean pork congee and the soft buns in front of me, suddenly struck by a bold and ridiculous thought. To verify my guess, I took a sip of the congee, then bit into a bun. Sure enough, it was stuffed with mushroom filling. I couldn't mistake this familiar taste. I looked suspiciously at Ethan, who was still with his head down, and asked, "Ethan, did you secretly have a crush on me before?" As soon as I asked, Ethan choked on his congee and began coughing violently. His face turned bright red, whether from choking or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. "Not just before, but even now, I still like you." Ethan stopped coughing and suddenly became serious. "I used to be too shy, and someone else beat me to it. This time, I don't want to miss my chance with you." I was left dumbfounded, unsure whether to believe him. "Wait, was it you who secretly sent me breakfast for half a year back then?" Ethan nodded seriously. "Who else could it have been? Henry?" Mentioning Henry made Ethan's face darken. "Back then, Henry was my roommate. He knew I liked you, but before I could gather the courage to confess, he went ahead and got together with you. I'll never forgive him for that." Ethan's tone was tinged with sadness, his voice full of regret. "I couldn't accept it. I ran away overseas like a coward. Ich froze, bazard. But I was with Henry a month after you left the country." At this, both Ethan and I were stunned for a moment before we simultaneously cursed, "That bastard Henry." After discussing it, Ethan and I decided to stick together and take action. Ethan kept putting in a word with his father to sabotage Henry, and before long, Henry was fired after only a few days on the job. During the brief time he worked there, I recorded all of his harassment and sent it to Emily. Of course, with Ethan around, Henry couldn't even get close enough to touch the hem of my clothes. On the day Henry left, he didn't even have time to pack his things. Emily grabbed him by the collar and dragged him out. The next day, when Henry came back to collect his belongings, his face was covered in scratch marks, bruised all over. The colors were quite spectacular: blue, purple, you name it. Before leaving, he tried one last time to annoy me. "Luna, I know you still love me. Whenever you want to come back, I'll be waiting for you." Believe it or not, Emily and I have absolutely nothing going on. I didn't say anything. I just pulled Ethan, who had been eavesdropping nearby, to me and kissed him on the lips. Then, I gave Henry a provocative look, and his face instantly twisted with fury. He stumbled away, his steps unsteady. I was absolutely satisfied, a wicked grin forming on my face. Finally, I felt like I had released all the pent-up frustration. However, when I turned around, I saw Ethan covering his lips, his ears red, his expression serious as he looked at me and said, "Luna, when are you going to give me a title?" I burst out laughing, my grin stretching from ear to ear, and I casually replied, "Whenever I feel like it, I'll give you one."